Welcome, everybody. It's good to see you.
We missed you.
What? What's?
We have missed you.
Oh, thank you. Well, I have to tell you, this is a weird thing that happened. Obviously, I let everybody know why we didn't have class last week, but a weird thing that I didn't realize, I guess, until after the fact. It's the only Wednesday we've missed. Believe it or not, that was the only one that we've missed.
I don't think we missed a Tuesday, have we, Rabbi?
No.
It's amazing. So in the midst of all this stuff, we have not missed one. So wow.
Good for you, Rabbi.
What?
Good for you.
Well, we wanted to keep things moving along. We wanted to keep people focused and positive, and look, we're supposed to be studying Torah. I mean, that's what we're here for. So, and I don't mean like here on our Zoom or whatever, but that's what we're here on this planet to do. So, yeah, it was important to do, but we can't do it unless there's people there. And thankfully, we've got people. Well, I'm going to tell you something right now. At this moment, the only other person who's in California, not California. Sorry, Diane. The only person who's in Southern California besides me is Mike and Mary. Other than that, everybody else.
Remember, we can see your house from our house. If I had a telescope.
Now Harvey is here. So let me just make sure that we're getting ready to go on to Facebook, because I'm going to get in trouble. My wife is the one who got me in trouble. It shows that she's watching. It's funny. Tracy never comes on Zoom, but she likes watching it on Facebook. So, and she always checks to make sure that it's streaming. She's always there. Another set of eyes, which is lucky. I'm lucky to have, but yeah, as of right now, it's not on. So I'm gonna make sure that it does go on.
I had the cable guy here for 2 hours. Supposedly everything's wonderful. And I just got that message, internet connection unstable.
Oh, no. Well.
So if I get off, you'll know why.
I'm sorry, Diane. Well, it's funny because I'm just letting some people on and more people on. And, it's interesting because our computers are all doing stuff that we didn't, we never did before. And we're a lot of us were not using, live streaming and Zoom and even our video much. And so all of a sudden, we kind of realized how important it is for people. And there's a lot of people who before this pandemic have been doing business for a long time on Zoom and on conference, and it just became part of our lives. But for a lot of people, they've been doing this for a while. So especially up where you are, Diane, up in the Silicon Valley, you know better than anything that this is they pioneered this. Look, I don't know what we'd be doing. I mean, part of me thinks that we couldn't have. They never even would have attempted this kind of shutdown if we didn't have this kind of technology now. So, look, I mean, I don't know that, by the way. That was kind of a bold thing I said, but I don't know. I don't know that it could have even been attempted if we didn't have this kind of technology and people couldn't work from home. So, yeah, luckily we have my daughter. I'm just waiting for a couple more people to jump on. And Rachel.
Excuse me, Diane, your problem might not be with your home, actually. It could be your area around your neighborhood. A lot of people using Wi-Fi type thing. That's usually the problem.
I think you're right. But he was so nice. They have a thing called Peacock that you can get on Xfinity. So he actually changed the box. It came today. And so
nice.
He changed a lot of wires, and everything was working fine when he left. But.
Yeah, so it's probably so many people right now in your neighborhood on your computer on Wi-Fi type thing.
That's good. That's a good point too. Mike, is that it's taxing.
Oh, it's terrible when Rich is on. When Rich is on the computer and I'm trying to get on, next door, and
It
I
has to
yell.
do with your wife.
Talk about Rich Tabak, another one of our Temple Beth and Me people. But
My next door neighbor,
so is he actually right next door?
right next door.
That's crazy. Well, at least he doesn't make a lot of noise.
I had the same
Yeah,
problem.
yeah, he does when he has his concerts. He does.
Oh yeah, but does he do that still?
Yeah,
All right.
but he plays good music, so I usually sit out and listen.
I was gonna say he's got a good he's got a good sound. Well, we're gonna let a few more people on, and here we go. So I know people are coming in, and thank you everybody for your messages of support. And I don't see Schulman's. I don't see Joyce on. Is she okay?
I
We're
just
wondering the
said,
same.
yeah, I don't.
Well, hopefully we'll locate her. But it's good to have you guys here. But
Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
want to make sure that she's okay. So again, I apologize for obviously I didn't want to miss class last week. I never want to miss, but yeah, we were in the midst of we actually hadn't even officially began morning, but definitely were not in the right frame of mind that Wednesday. I wasn't really Tuesday morning because I had a feeling it was going to happen Tuesday. For those of us who were those who were with, I had a pretty good feeling that my dad was going to pass that day. And I got there. I haven't talked much about this, but I got there about maybe 2 minutes after he passed. So I had a feeling that it was going to happen, and I drove over there. I had a funeral, unfortunately, to do. Actually, Mike, I don't know if I told you that. I had a funeral over at Shalom. At I think I told you. I don't remember, but I had a funeral over there. So that's up in Lakeview Terrace.
You say hello to my family.
I did. I was right by it, right on that section. But I actually didn't spend that much time there because I went right back. So the funeral was at 3. I was going to come by and I was going to go visit my dad in Burbank afterwards. But someone told me to go now before, and I knew I wasn't going to be able to spend more than 10, 15 minutes there. But something just told me to go there, and I got off the freeway, and as I was driving up the street, my brother called me and told me he had just passed. So I missed by about 2 minutes. But look, it could have happened at 4 o'clock in the morning, and it, could have happened any time. But I was about 30 seconds late for my mom and about 2 minutes late for my dad. But look, I could have been in the hospital, or I know people who go down to the cafeteria and come back and the person passes. So look, I'm not, I was close, but both times, but not there at the moment, passing. And then yesterday on Tuesday morning class, we actually were looking at the story of Jacob blessing his grandchildren, and we were looking at the commentary on that section from Genesis, and it was pretty coincidental. Tonight, I wanted to take a look at the Torah portion that we missed last week because Teitzei is such an important portion, and I wanted to make sure that we did that. And not that this week's not important too, of course it is, but I did want to give everybody a chance to see a little bit of Teitzei, because otherwise we got to wait till next year. So let me put this up here for everybody to see, and yeah, it's hard to believe. I mean, we have about 4 more portions in Deuteronomy, 4 more portions in the Torah before we come to the end. So here's Tavo, that's this week's portion, and Teitzei just above that. We're going to kind of look. We'll go a little bit faster through the portions because we're going to do. We'll do 2. All right, we'll do our best to go through 2. We're going to start with Teitzei, and again, we'll dedicate the study tonight to my father Phil Blazer, who again, none of this would really have been possible without him. So as we study Torah tonight and again, as we get close to the end of the year, hopefully continue to do some good mitzvahs and stay strong in these last weeks. So Teitzei, the portion, this week is Ki Tavo. Last week is Ki Teitzei. They get confusing because they both begin with the word ki, which usually translates as when or if. It's a kind of cause and effect word, oftentimes, or kind of gives you consequence. And it also is because in Hebrew, but you do get confused. Does Ki Teitzei come first or Ki Tavo come first? People sometimes get those mixed up, but they definitely go together in the sense that they're part of the laws that we get in this section of Deuteronomy that Moses is speaking to the people. He's in the early part of Deuteronomy, he's kind of repeating a lot of laws and principles. He repeats the Ten Commandments. He kind of makes overview statements. And by the way, I am looking to make sure if Joyce comes on that we're going to let her in, guys. So,
Great.
but when we get to this section of Deuteronomy, though, in some cases, and I was going to say also in Re'eh, we get the laws of kashrut, which we got earlier in Leviticus. Here, when we get to Ki Teitzei and Ki Tavo, we actually get some laws that we haven't seen before. And again, maybe they're connected with the ideas, the values that we have earlier, but there are some here that are really powerful, really important, and we don't get them until now. And one of the reasons why we wanted to talk about Ki Teitzei is because this portion has, according to the count, 72 mitzvot, 72 commandments, which is a lot. It means almost every verse is a commandment. And some of them go together and some of them are kind of miscellaneous and don't necessarily seem to follow a theme or connection to the previous law. But as we know, there's 613 commandments in the Torah. If 72 of them are in this week's portion, you don't have to be a great math scholar to do the calculation and realize that means over 10% are in this Torah portion. So we have over 50 portions. But, and again, I guess by that math, there'd be, by that counting of 50 portions, there'd be 54 portions. There'd be about 10, 15 mitzvot per portion. Now, remember, in Genesis, we only have one or two commandments. And I said one or two, depending on whose count you're following. And then in Exodus, we don't really have any commandments until we get to Exodus chapter 12. So we have whole sections of the Torah where we don't have any commandments. But still, if you do the math, this is quite a lot. And of course, it has the most, and it has over 10% of all the commandments. So you're going to get your daily recommended dose of commandments, which is why we wanted to do it. So let's take a look. It's time to jump in. And it says, Ki Teitzei, when you take the field against your enemies, Ki Teitzei lemilchama. So it really is talking about, at the very beginning, going into battle. And it says, when you take them, when you go into battle and you win, and you get some of them captive, and you see among the captives a beautiful woman, and you desire her to take to wife, you shall bring her into your house, shall trim her hair, pare her nails, and discard her captive's garb. She shall spend a month's time in your house lamenting her father and mother. After that, you may come to her and possess her, and she shall be your wife. Then, should you no longer want her, you must release her outright. You must not sell her for money, since you had your will of her. You must not enslave her. And that is this law, which is about 3 verses, the law of what happens when a woman comes into your control through war. Now, again, by our standards, this is difficult maybe to read and to think about, because this is sexual slavery, if you will. But it's not sexual slavery, folks. This is actually marriage. If you take a woman in battle and you decide you want her, she becomes your wife. She is not your sex slave. She is not your possession. She is your wife, which means that you better be pretty serious about this if you want to marry her, because if you don't want to marry her at some point, you got to give her a divorce. When it says you must release her, it's talking about giving her a get. It's talking about literally having to pay her, and again, she's not a servant. She's not a slave. She's in no way your property. Now, as strange again as maybe this sounds to our ears in our modern world, folks, there are people and there are places in the world that you know where this is not being followed right now. And I'm talking about what ISIS and ISIL did in the last 5 or 6 years. I mean, literally a couple of years ago, women were being rounded up in Iraq and Syria in cities and villages that ISIL took control over. And they took women as sex slaves. They literally took them away from their families, killed their families in many cases, and they didn't marry them. They literally just took them. And so as again, we would think, well, why does this even have to be a law? Yeah, it's a law because there are still people who wouldn't follow this law. So this is, for its time, very, very progressive and very protective of women's rights. Again, I can't stress this enough. This is actually an example of very protective behavior for victims of war, for victims of, for women. And again, there are places where they have not caught up to this. So just understand that this is what we're dealing with. No other culture we know of had rights for prisoners, captives, and especially women captives as the Torah did. So any questions there? Because from that, it kind of then, the connection obviously here is in the next part has to do with marriage and the laws of what happens with women. Now, I will tell you this. There are no descriptions really of detail of what happens when someone gets married in the Torah. We know that by the rabbinic period, by the time of the Talmud, there was a ketubah. We don't know when exactly that became normative. But what we do know is that the release, the divorce, the get is mentioned in the Torah itself. So again, ketubah is not mentioned directly, but it is, but the get, the release is. So divorce is actually specified in the Torah. And here's one example. If a man has two wives, one loved and the other unloved, and both the loved and the unloved have borne him sons, but the firstborn is the son of the unloved one, when he wills his property to his sons, he must not treat as firstborn the son of the loved one in disregard of the son of the unloved one who is older. Again, this makes sense when, again, look back in Genesis and look at some of those stories about Rachel and Leah, and later on in the story of, after this, the story of Samuel, his mother Hannah, and the other wife Peninnah. So this is dealing with a time when people could be married, a man could be married to more than one wife. So instead he must accept the firstborn, the son of the unloved one, and allot to him a double portion of all he possesses, since he is the first fruit of his vigor. The birthright is his due. So again, keep this in mind. These laws are kind of about family dynamics and what happens. And the next law is one that is one of the more famous laws of this portion. If a man has a wayward and defiant son who does not heed his father or mother and does not obey them even after they discipline him, his father and mother shall take hold of him and bring him out to the elders of his town at the public place of his community. They shall say to the elders of this town, this son of ours is disloyal and defiant. It says, sorer umoreh. He is disloyal and defiant. He is a glutton, zolel vesoveh. He is a glutton and a drunkard. Thereupon the men of his town shall stone him to death. Thus you will sweep out the evil from your midst. All Israel will hear and be afraid. Now, what's so interesting about this is that the Talmud says that this never happened. This law was on the books to protect society, to scare people, but it was never done. They say that this law was on the books, but never enacted. It does kind of reflect a different type of society where, again, family is a patriarchal, the structure of the family and the tribe was paramount. And that, again, when people moved into cities, sometimes discipline was a harder issue. And And so Jewish law sometimes reflects this idea that city life oftentimes leads to bad behavior, and it becomes more contagious in a city. It is kind of a weird, obviously, it's a horrific thing to think about, but it also kind of reminds people that the responsibility for parents is pretty important, and of course, it has a wider effect on everybody else. But again, the rabbis claim it never happened. It's never been enforced. It then, again, what's the connection to the next law? If a man is guilty of a capital offense, which we just read about one, and is put to death, and you impale him on a stake. So this is obviously not the previous one, which was stoning, but another form of capital punishment. It says you must not let his corpse remain on the stake overnight. You must bury him the same day. For the impaled body is an affront to God. You shall not defile the land that the Lord your God has given you to possess. So again, according to Jewish law, you're not allowed to, if you execute somebody, you're not allowed to leave the body overnight. You can have the person on a stake for a couple hours. Assumedly, again, this person was either hung or put in such a way that it was a public execution. I mean, all these executions are public, but the body was there for people to see. Can't be left overnight. Now, again, this tells you that by the time of the Romans, when millions of Jews were crucified, this was a completely abhorrent by Jewish law, and Jews were sickened by the idea that bodies were left out in the public, even if they were criminals, even if they deserved a capital punishment. Their bodies were not supposed to be left out. This was considered to be terrible disregard for human body, human life, even that of someone who actually deserved execution. Now, by the way, before you say, so what's the big deal? That seems kind of normal. It's not normal. It's not done in other countries where they do public executions and they leave the bodies hanging, like in contemporary Iran. It's also wasn't the case in as you may have seen in movies depicting frontier life. Right. They left the executed out on display, either in a coffin or hanging for a while. They wanted people to be scared by it. They wanted to teach people a lesson and put the fear of God in people. So the common thing was to leave them on at least overnight, so that people could see what they did to, cattle rustlers or hooligans or whatever it was that they did. I mean, that was American history. And even to this day, I think one of the things that I take away from this law is that we don't look at people when they're executed or even after they're executed. I find it distasteful and kind of against Jewish law. We're not supposed to have open caskets, as you know. We're not supposed to look at the bodies of our loved ones even after they pass. They're supposed to give them dignity. And we're also going to do that even for people who are our enemies. And that's why I've never liked looking at pictures of the execution of Saddam Hussein or Bin Laden, just dead body. I don't like seeing those pictures, even of people who are horrible enemies of humanity. I mean, these are people who are literally horrible individuals who we were responsible to some extent to bring to justice. I'm glad they're no longer a threat and no longer on this planet, but you know what? I don't want to see their dead bodies. I really don't. And this kind of goes along with this idea that even an enemy, even a horrible person, there's a dignity to the human body which is degraded by their dead body. Keep that in mind. These laws, again, sometimes are connected, sometimes not so much. Because the next law we're going to get into is the law of if an animal goes astray of your neighbor, ox or sheep, don't ignore it. Take it back to him. If your fellow does not live by you or do not know who he is, you shall bring it home and it shall remain to you until he claims it. Then you shall give it back to him. So if he comes back days later, months later, the Talmud talks about even years later, you have to give him back the animal. Even though you've been feeding that animal, you've got to give it back to him. I mean, he could give you, he should give you compensation, but it's not yours after you fed it. It's not like, oh, I have an animal, I took care of it, it's mine now. It's not the case. You'll do the same with his ass, or the same with his garment, and you shall do it with anything your fellow loses and you find. You must not remain indifferent. So it's not finders keepers in Judaism. It's finders, and I can use it, I can derive benefit for it when it's in my home, but it's not mine. There's even discussions, by the way, in the Talmud, whether the benefit that you derive from that animal. So for example, if that animal, you bring it home and then it has babies, the Talmud actually weighs in on that and says those animals are the property of the guy whose animal it was in the first place. Even if those animals were born in your possession. Pretty strict. It's a pretty strict law. Again, along with that was this very important law in animals. For animals, this is about animals, folks. This is your fellow's ass or ox. It's fallen on the road. Do not ignore it. You must help him raise it up, right? You can't walk by and ignore it. A woman. Now that was about animals. This next one, you're going to say, where did this come from? A woman must not put on man's apparel, nor a man should wear woman's clothing. For whoever does these things is abhorrent to the Lord your God. So again, a lot of people point out that this is the prohibition against cross-dressing. It seems pretty clear. There were, by the way, exceptions for this in Jewish law. The rabbis had said thousands of years ago that you could dress up as a woman for Purim. So people were given permission to dress up as women on those holidays. They could dress up as Esther or Vashti or whatever if they wanted to. But again, normally in Judaism, you were not supposed to wear women's clothes, and women were not supposed to wear men's clothes. It was considered to be again violation of people being in their right place. And you'll see that theme in this portion. You'll see that this is a theme. Look, this is an issue that obviously people reading the Torah today have to come to terms with, and we can talk about how people do come to terms with it. But I just want you to understand the connection, and you'll see this to other things in this portion. Look, we're about to go back to some stuff about animals, but we will come back to this issue of places, people and animals and things being in their right place. And that kind of goes along with that. By the way, clearly means, but I want to point out that people were not wearing the garments or the clothes of their gender identity even back then. Why? Because it wouldn't be in the Torah if people weren't doing it, by the way.
Rabbi?
These are real issues. Yeah.
I have a question. Is the word tov... Oh, you just moved it up.
Sorry.
Yeah. Is the word to'ava... Does that mean abhorrent?
Yeah. So how did you knew that already?
No, I was looking at the passage and I thought that's what it was, but because I never heard that before. That word's not used that often.
No, but as we pointed out, and as we point out in other places, again, when people are going to focus on this, the word to'eva, and this is to'avat, to'avat Adonai, it's abhorrent to God. Look, the language is strong, by the way. It doesn't say that it's an aberration. It's abhorrent. It's an abhorrence. It says it's abhorrent to God. I don't want to dwell on that too much, but the word to'eva, the word abhorrent, is the same word we use for non-kosher food. So if people are going to talk about this being the breaking point for them, I will point out that, again, it's the same word that's used for shellfish or treif. So the word to'eva is something you're clearly is a negative, but is it in the same stamp? Is it in the same realm of pork and shellfish? Well, according to the Torah, it is. If we're going to look at the word, and thank you for pointing that out. Now we go back to animals, and this one is a strange one, which the rabbis point out, kind of in a few times. They point out, wow, the Torah is concerned with some pretty detailed things. pretty minute things, which of course then begs the question, well, why aren't all minute things in there? And the rabbis kind of recognize that. They're a little struck by this issue that this seems like a really specific situation. And there aren't a lot of specific situations, but let's look at this. There's 2 verses. If along the road you chance upon a bird's nest in any tree or on the ground, with fledglings or eggs, and the mother sitting over the fledglings or on the eggs, do not take the mother with her young. Let the mother go and take only the young, in order that you may fare well and have a long life. Now, not only is that a very detailed, and now hey Joyce, you got here just in time to hear about birds. So here it says that you're not allowed to take the mother with the young. And for people who haven't read this before, might be a little surprised, again, that the Torah has this kind of detail. But it is basically saying, again, if you take the mother and the young together, then you've essentially wiped out, or have the potential to wipe out, that species. And the eggs, they may hatch, they may not hatch, but the fledglings may survive, the little baby chicks, they may survive. But the mother is already living. And let's not be greedy here. Now, again, I don't want to, I'm a vegetarian, so this ain't my problem. But the point here was to really make sure that people were thinking a little bit about animals. And while I guess on one hand, it looks like it's insensitive to take the babies, the reality is, if you take the mother and leave the babies are going to die. And that's horrific. I mean, that's completely it's not compassionate. It's really not, it's not humane, if you will. So think about that. That is a law in the Torah. And it interestingly says, so that you may fare well and have a long life. So very rarely do we have like a reward for something too. So even though this seems like a minutia, there's actually a specific thing here which we get as a reward for doing it. So consider that for a second. This law, I mean, there's other laws, where we don't get, you're supposed to do this. If you think about them, they're very rare. Like when it says, honor your father and mother, it says similarly. So again, so that you will live. Similar words, not exactly, but orach yamim, it's almost the same phrase. But very rarely does it say that. Usually it just says, this is what you do. Here it says, so that you'll have a long life. And again, the rabbis kind of point out in a way, and they do it a few times in the Talmud, that if the Torah is saying this for something as kind of minor as this law of the nest, the bird, then we don't really know what are major and minor mitzvot. We can't just say, well, clearly honoring your father or mother, or clearly not stealing, that's a no-brainer. They're basically saying you never know, and let's not be the judge of what is a minor commandment. So we really don't say there's minor commandments, because any of them have the potential to change our lives and quite frankly, to make the world a better place. So keep that in mind. I mean, when we go through these laws, we don't get that a lot, but we do have these wonderful laws. This other one, by the way, this next one is one of my favorite in the whole portion. Actually, it's one of my favorite in the whole Torah. When you build a new house, you shall make a parapet for your roof. All right, this is the gag. So this is gagecha, your house, your roof. You do not bring bloodgill on your house if anyone would fall from it. So if you have a roof, you have a house, and you're going to put you're going to allow people to come up on the roof, which was actually pretty common in those days, because again, during the summer, that's where people would live. They'd oftentimes go up onto the roof, and they would live there during the hot months. You have to have a fence. You have to have a parapet. You have to have a guardrail around your roof so that no one falls off and hurts themselves. And this law is so important because it reminds us that we have a responsibility to keep people safe. And people have pointed out that there's a direct line to this law in the Torah to modern laws that we have, like wearing seatbelts and taking things into consideration that help keep people safe. And then, of course, today, you know, to make the argument, we've almost gone overboard, but there is this idea that we got to make sure our homes are safe. Now, of course, today you could get sued. You know, you'd be liable if you make a building, a work building, or a residential building that's not safe. But the Torah actually requires it thousands of years ago that your place has to be up to code. It has to be safe, and of course, by extension, you know, that your car would have to have a seatbelt, or that your you know, the building that you have today, you know, that has an elevator or stairs, that those are built in a way that's not going to cause you know, any danger for people. So this is a really, really important law, and one that kind of we by extension, we get this idea that we have to keep people safe. We have a responsibility for our homes and for the buildings that we create, and when we have someone's life in our hands, we take that seriously. The next law gets back to the laws that maybe have a little bit more to do with the cross-dressing issue, with those clothes issues, which are ones of being in the proper place. It says, do not sow your vineyard with a second kind of seed, else the crop from the seed you have sown and the yield of the vineyard they will not, and the yield may not be used. It's basically saying, again, don't mix together seeds that don't belong together. Don't basically, again, one can make the argument, genetically engineer crops. And again, you could make the argument that we're not talking about simply trying to make a better crop, but actually crossbreeding, you know, things together. But the Torah warns against it. It warns against creating hybrids, really, more than just, you know, some people say this is genetic engineering. I would say it's more hybrids. It's creating hybrids. And again, the next law, you shall not plow with an ox and an ass together. Again, keeping them separate. Not maybe so much because, again, it could create a hybrid animal, which, of course, a horse and an ass, a donkey, will create an animal together, a mule. This seems to have more to do with the fact that the animals are not equal animals, and it's not fair for an ass to have to go with the same weight as the ox. It's not fair to plow these two animals together. It's uneven, and it's creating a burden on the animal. It's more of compassion for the animal. But then it does go back to the next law, which is about combining cloth, wool and linen, what we call shotness. And shotness is actually still observed in religious communities and Orthodox Torah conforming communities. They will not allow blended garments. They will not blended fabrics, I should say, that blend two natural fabrics like wool and linen. You can have a blend between polyester and, you know, some other kind of non-organic material, but not two organic materials. One that is an animal fabric, and one that is an animal and plant, and having a plant-based fabric like linen. So this is you know, would go for cotton and wool blend too. But again, this is talking about two natural fabrics, animal and flora and fauna based products, if you will. It doesn't have to do with blends, but there are. This is still a very serious rule, and people will not buy what they call shotness. They call it shotness fabric, which is the cloth that is both semer, which is the wool, and the pishtim, which is the linen, cotton fabrics. Now, with the theme of clothes, and the next one, making tassels on the four corners of your garment, which again is the law of having tzitzit. Here, it's not exactly the same way as it is in Numbers. It actually doesn't use the word tzitzit, but it does talk about the four corner. So less to do with the type of fabric, but now because we're on clothing. So there's that. So those laws, sometimes they lead to the next one, and then maybe again it jumps around, because this one jumps back to where we were before. And it's a little different because this is not necessarily, again, this is not a situation of war, but it is a situation of a man who is, if he doesn't find that he likes the woman he's married. So here's what happens. A man marries a woman and cohabits with her. Then he takes an aversion to her and makes up charges against her and defames her, saying, I married this woman, but when I approached her, I found out she was not a virgin. In such a case, the girl's father and mother shall produce the evidence of the girl's virginity before the elders of the gate. And the girl's father say to the elders, I gave this man my daughter to wife, but he has taken an aversion to her. So he has made up charges. I did not find your daughter a virgin, but here's the evidence of my daughter's virginity. And they shall spread out the cloth before the elders of the town. The elders of that town shall take that man and flog him. And they shall find him 100 shekels of silver and give it to the girl's father, for the man has defamed a virgin in Israel. Moreover, she shall remain his wife. He shall never have the right to divorce her. Now, before you comment on the last part, which is that seems to be punishing the woman, remember something. The whole idea here is to do everything you can to dissuade a man from making up this horrible charge against his wife. Because of course, if she is, if she was not a virgin, of course, it's implying that the family lied, that she was a woman of immoral behavior, and the fact that, again, he didn't get what he paid for, and he did pay for her. He paid a bride price for her, and now he's accusing them of essentially conning them. Well, he not only gets beaten, but he also has to pay 100 shekels of silver, which is a huge amount of money. I mean, we're talking about like over a year, well, maybe not a year's salary, but, well, it depends. It depends on what he did. But that's a huge penalty for that accusation, for that charge. And it really was to stop them from doing it. So the final step is, if it turns out that you're wrong, that you lied, then you have to continue to support her, and you have to do all these other things. You're much better off. You're much better off divorcing her and just owning up to the fact that you don't love her anymore and the marriage didn't work out. But don't accuse her to try to get out of your marriage. Why is this here? Because it happened, and it still happens. And it happens, by the way, when it happens in some countries, the woman sometimes dies. I mean, this literally happened. There's a case that just happened in Iran where a girl was 16, I think, and she was executed by her father. Her father killed her in an honor killing. And the father, I think, got 9 years in prison or 10 years in prison. But it was a very high profile situation in Iran. And this, I'm telling you, you have to understand there's still places where this law would be considered too liberal, too progressive. But wait, it does say if the charges prove true and the girl was found not to have been a virgin, then the girl shall be brought out to the entrance of her father's house, and the men of the town shall stone her to death, for she did a shameful thing in Israel, committing fornication while under her father's authority. Thus you will sweep evil from your midst. And again, this is what the punishment was for the young woman. So again, you can make the argument, well, the guy doesn't die, he only gets beaten if he turns out to be a liar. Okay, so that's a legitimate point, that the woman actually could die. Now, I will tell you, let's look at what the law does say, though. If a man is found lying with another man's wife, both of them, the man and the woman with whom he lay, shall die. Thus you will sweep away evil from Israel. So it doesn't say just that a woman dies in these cases of sex out of wedlock or out of marriage or infidelity, but the man dies too. And as I said, that is not the case in countries even as we speak. So this is a law that really protected the family structure. Did it happen a lot? The rabbis claim these kind of things never happened because people were so scared. But we have to assume that there was a reason why these laws were there, that people did break them and there needed to be punishment. Now, along those lines, now we get to an issue that we have not had articulated yet in the Torah, but based on what we've read, this maybe should have come first because it explains what we're talking about here, which is this issue of the virginity of the woman in the first place. So here's this law. You can see why these are together, but again, we were just reading right before that about roofs and birds, and now we got back into this. But in the case of a virgin who is engaged to a man, if a man comes upon her in town and lies with her, you shall take the two of them to the gate of the town and stone them to death. The girl because she did not cry out for help in the town, and the man because he violated another man's wife. Thus you will sweep away evil from your midst. Okay, kind of similar to the previous one, other than the fact that in this case they're engaged. They haven't actually been married yet. And so she's still a virgin. Okay. But the next law says, but if the man comes upon the engaged girl in the open country, and the man lies with her by force, only the man who lay with her shall die. But you shall do nothing to the girl. The girl did not incur the death penalty, for this case is like the man of attacking another and murdering him. He came upon her in the open, and though the engaged girl cried for help, there was none to save her. You can see the point here, which is that even if she didn't call out, we give her the assumption that she did. And the penalty is only for the man. It's not for the woman. Again, all of these laws sound horrific. They, again, by our standards, you'd say, how could this happen? But read again what the Torah just said. This is the case of a man attacking another and murdering him. They compare rape to murder. The punishment for rape, the Torah says, is the same as murder. So understand that for Jewish law, they're equated. Murder and rape are on the same tier. It really is that way in the Torah. It was considered to be, again, as if a person was murdered. Again, you could say that in our society today, we don't take it, we don't take it as seriously to some extent. Consider that. There's so many cases of people who've gotten away with rape. If they were worried about a death penalty, how many people would maybe act differently? I don't know, folks. And maybe this could be the first law, or I would say, but saved instead for the end here. If a man comes upon a virgin who is not engaged, and he seizes her and lies with her, and they are discovered, the man who lay with her shall pay the girl's father 50 shekels of silver, and she shall be his wife. Because he has violated her, he can never have the right to divorce her. Now, the question is, can she divorce him? Can she decide that she doesn't want to be married to him? Again, the rabbis seem to imply that this doesn't allow a rapist to be married to a woman. By the way, just so you know, another Muslim country, Turkey, just has essentially reinstated or reinforced this law which allows for a person to, again, rape somebody and then basically pay a price for the rape, essentially marry the victim. Again, according to Jewish law, if you rape somebody, there's no, well, you just pay a price and that's it. I will tell you this. The purpose of this law is not to encourage rape. It is to encourage people to not even have premarital sex, because it doesn't say that he attacked her. It says he comes upon her. It says he seizes her, but the word seizes her does not necessarily mean that she was completely without permission. There's nothing in this law that says anything about her crying out or not crying out. It seems to be, again, this could be consensual. Look, people could also argue it only applies in situations where they are discovered, that it's a known thing that they had sex. But essentially, this was not the kind of marriage you were supposed to be in. But according to Jewish law, and it is on the books to this day, if you've slept with a woman who's not your wife and is not married to somebody else, and was a virgin when you slept with her, technically by Jewish law, you would have to give that woman a divorce, or she could ask you for a divorce, or demand a divorce. And again, what if the husband didn't give it? We can get into a discussion about that too. But the reality is that technically speaking, anyone who engaged was living, in sin, if you will, would technically be married to their spouse by Jewish law, by their live-in partner by Jewish law. So bia, which is what this is called, bia, sexual knowledge of a person, is one of the ways that a marriage is entered into. So it definitely discourages premarital sex. Did it happen? Of course it did. But was it also essentially going to be a problem for you if you were found? Yeah, because it's the guy who has to pay. It's not the woman who has to pay. It's the guy who has to pay. And 50 shekels, again, is a substantial amount of money. It's not a bride price. It's more, much more, numerous times more, 10 times more, perhaps than what the bride price would have been if they had gotten married in the first place, or 5 or 10 times more. So this is a lot of money. This was not something you wanted to do. So now we get into some laws that are maybe connected to what we just read about family dynamics, but kind of go back and forth here. So let's keep going. No man shall marry his father's former wife so as to remove his father's garment. That's your stepmother. You're not allowed to marry your stepmother. I think in America you technically could, by the way. I don't know. I think I saw a Jerry Springer show about that once. You're not prohibited from doing that in the United States. By Jewish law, you're not allowed to do that. Because again, it's considered to be an offense on your family and on your father. Not just, again, essentially sleeping with your stepmother would be, again, getting into your father's private affairs. The next law, no one whose testes are crushed or whose member is cut off shall be admitted into the congregation of the Lord. Now, what does it mean to be admitted into the congregation? Does that apply to converts, to people who would enter Judaism from other faiths or other backgrounds, ethnicities, if you will? Maybe. Maybe it was, again, coming into the tabernacle or coming close to God. But the word kahal Adonai is translated as congregation of God. Definitely dissuades that kind of behavior. Was it done? Of course it was done. That's why it's there. We read about eunuchs in the Bible. Judaism did not only not encourage it, but again, according to this, you are not supposed to you're not supposed to do this if you want to be part of the Jewish community. Now, here's an interesting law. No one misbegotten shall be admitted into the congregation of the Lord. None of his descendants, even in the 10th generation, shall be admitted into the congregation of the Lord. This is the law of mamzerim or mamzerut. Now, a lot of people know that word because it's a Yiddish word, right? Mamzer. A mamzer, it literally means bastard. And we use the word mamzer. It's not a good word to use. It's a derogatory word. But some people will say that guy's a real mamzer, you know? Like maybe he's tough in business. He's a real mamzer. But literally it means somebody whose background, whose family background is unknown. They translate it as unknown. It could be, again, somebody who we knew their background and it was a violation of Jewish law. So, for example, someone who is the product of incest, someone who was a product of their father and stepmother, or their father was married to would have been their step grandmother, if you will, but also their mother. That would be a situation of mamzeru. So the Torah says that those people are not allowed even in the 10th generation. So 10th generation, they're talking a long time. We don't really follow this law anymore, mainly because there's a principle that we don't really know people's genealogy really well. I mean, now people learning it, they're doing a lot of. I mean, that's what 23andMe is for. But you know what? Those aren't perfect, and they also aren't. They're also not necessarily proof for anything for Jewish law. So, for example, you can't come into a rabbi and say, "Hey, look, according to my 23andMe, I'm Jewish. I'm 3/4 Jewish." Well, first of all, even if it said that it was your mother that was Jewish, you're not. You still have to go through conversion. Some people would say, "Well, do they really have to go through conversion if we can prove that their mother?" Well, if you can prove that their mother is Jewish beyond just the 23andMe report, then maybe. Which means, where's their parents' ketubah? Where's the identification of where this person was when they were born to know that they were recognized as part of the Jewish community? Can't just use your 23andMe report. We don't consider that good enough. But at the same time, we kind of understand that even if we did have the ability to genetically identify people, it's not really just about your genes. It's about how you were raised. It's about, where we can place you amongst the community. And again, eventually the rabbis kind of said, we can't do this with anybody because everyone's all mixed up. And this really happened after the first temple was destroyed. They basically said all the tribes got mixed up, and we don't know who's a Levite and who's a Benjaminite and who's a, you're Kohanim. I mean, we believe you. We're not going to say no. But if you tell us that you don't have proof, we're still going to believe that you're a Kohen. And on top of that, if you don't know, we don't know. We can't tell you. And they kind of set it up, even for thousands of years later when we can do tests. We don't look at the tests. We don't say, well, you've got proof that you're a Levite or that you're whatever. We basically say, look, we're going to give you the benefit of the doubt, and we definitely don't want people to not know who they come from. But we do have this law on the books, which basically is definitely discouraging people from having illegitimate children, if you will. We don't like that word illegitimate, but again, the word is essentially, being born out of wedlock. In America, and I guess, in our etymology, we use the word bastard really to talk about someone who's illegitimate. In Judaism, again, out of wedlock. In Judaism, it's not really necessarily out of wedlock. It's somebody who is born out of a relationship that wasn't allowed. And to some extent, one would make the argument that goes to the next law too, which is no Ammonite or Moabite shall be admitted into the congregation of the Lord. None of their descendants, even in the 10th generation, shall ever be admitted into the congregation of the Lord, because they did not meet you with food and water on your journey after you left Egypt. And because they hired Balaam, the son of Beor from Pethor of Aram, to curse you, which we read about back in Numbers, the cursing which turned into a blessing. But we don't forget. But the Lord your God refused to heed Balaam. Instead, the Lord your God turned the curse into blessing for. The Lord your God loves you. You shall never concern yourself with their welfare or benefit as long as you live. But you shall not abhor an Edomite, for he is your kinsman. You shall not abhor an Egyptian, for you were a stranger in their land. Children born to them may be admitted to the congregation of the Lord in the 3rd generation. Now, what's interesting about this is that this law, my friends, was not followed. How do we know that? Because King Solomon was married to an Ammonite woman. And her son, and Solomon's son, Rehoboam, became king of Judah. So we know that this wasn't followed, that Ammonites definitely became part of the kingdom. But let's go back even further. Even though Ruth, the Moabite woman, went through a conversion according to maybe our text, or definitely according to the rabbis, when Ruth becomes the wife of Boaz, and even maybe you make the argument, well, it's a woman, it's not a man. Ruth is the great-grandmother of King David. So the Moabites and the Moabites and the Ammonites definitely became part of our people. The Edomites, interestingly, and again, Moabites and Ammonites are descendants of Lot. They're Lot's children through his daughters, right? Through that incestuous union we read back in Genesis after Sodom and Gomorrah are destroyed. That's where the Ammonites and Moabites trace their ancestry back. The Edomites trace their ancestry back to Esau, to Jacob's brother. So they're actually cousins. They're a little bit closer. They're B'nai Yitzhak. They're sons of Isaac. They're also, of course, sons of Abraham, but they're also sons of Isaac, even more so. So they're allowed to come in, interestingly. After a few generations, they're allowed to come in. And the Egyptians are allowed to come in, even though they're not related to us at all. They're a Hamitic people, even more so. They're like a whole different family tree. But they're allowed to come in, not because of what their ancestry is, their ancestor, but because of their behavior, because we were strangers in their land. And look, there was a time when the Egyptians took care of us. And because of that, we're going to allow them entry into our community eventually. We're not going to say, oh, that person's an Egyptian. They can never be part of our family. So it's very interesting, this law. And again, the children of those unions might also have be considered mamzerut. They might also be considered mamzerim, because even though the person didn't get admitted, you married the daughter of an Ammonite, or you married an Ammonite. What happens to your kids? It seems as though, again, there is a way for them to eventually come into our community, but it's not encouraged, to put it mildly. And again, you did not want your children to have this issue going on with them. Look, we know from genetics today that the Jewish community had a very, very low rate of intermarriage over the years from one side. And we had a very low rate of intermarriage, period. But it was much more common for non-Jewish women to be included in the community than the other way around. And so what we find is in genetics, we found a more common occurrence of Gentile women marrying into the community, but less so, much less so, of Gentile men marrying into the community. And so that very rarely happened. I mean, to the point where in some cases it's almost undetectable, the amount of intermarriage on the male side of the gene. So it tells us that it didn't happen a lot. And of course, it kind of makes sense because if the women were allowed to come into the community, if they were allowed, like Ruth, to convert, if there was not the same kind of restriction, then maybe again, this was what the Torah is hinting at, and it kind of allows for the genetic pool to be there's a Gentile admixture to it, but it really usually only comes in from the female side. That being said, a huge percentage of Ashkenazi Jews, we actually can now trace them back to about 4 common women ancestors. A huge percentage of Ashkenazi Jews have one of these 4 women as our ancestor about 1,000 years ago. So there are definitely not a whole lot of branches off in our family tree, which again could allow or explain why we also have some higher rates of some genetic diseases too. But it is interesting that the case of Gentile men being part of the community was much less common. I mean, much less common, like a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of the occurrence that we have for Gentile women. Okay.
Do you know the 4 women?
We don't know their names. We don't have names for them. We don't have them, but we know that they existed based on their genetic markers. So we can actually go back and say these 4 women had all of these descendants, and it's a tremendous amount. Let me just see if I can find what the total number was, or the percentage. Ashkenazi.
So you can tell by their DNA?
Uh-huh.
Uh-huh.
And I will tell you, let's see. This went back to, so we have a higher version of a higher rate of Gentile women from Europe amongst women, again, who probably converted to Judaism over the last years. But I'm trying to find the, I think they said it was 4 women, which is kind of ironic because we have 4 matriarchs. Here, let me just share this.
Hello?
Nearly half of Ashkenazi Jews are descendant from 4 founding mothers. Some 3.5 million, or 40% of Ashkenazi Jews, are descended from just 4 founding mothers who lived in Europe 1,000 years ago. The mothers were part of a small group who founded the Ashkenazi Jewish community. So it's based on detailed comparative analysis of DNA sequence variation in the mitochondrial DNA, which is the mother side. So 3.5 million of the 8 million Ashkenazi Jews in the world can be traced back to only 4 women. I mean, that's amazing. That's insane. So when we talk about the likelihood that I mean, again, you're going back 1,000 years ago, but it really is telling us that there's a huge amount of shared DNA amongst the Ashkenazi community, percentage-wise. Because again, some of those people are connected numerous times to that. So, so now we go back to some laws about going into battle. You'll see, it kind of jumps around a lot. But when you go out as a troop against your enemies, be on guard against anything untoward. If any among you has been rendered unclean by a nocturnal emission, you must leave the camp. He must not re-enter the camp. Toward evening, he shall bathe in water, and at sundown he may re-enter the camp. Further, there shall be an area outside the camp where you will relieve yourself, right? So there's supposed to be a latrine, but it's not supposed to be in the middle of the camp. Again, the Torah is dealing with some very, very specific laws. And these are laws which protect us. And it says that you're supposed to have a spike with your gear, with your army equipment. And when you have squatted, when you've gone to the bathroom, you shall dig a hole and cover up your excrement. I mean, you could say the Torah, the fact that it gets into this minutia is amazing, but this is based on protection of life. And again, before we even understood about bacteria, the fact that you can get people sick by doing this. Since the Lord your God moves about in your camp to protect you and to deliver your enemies to you, let your camp be holy. Let him not find anything unseemly among you and turn away from you. So even when you're in battle, remember, you got to create a holy place. Pretty amazing. Now, we're gonna, as you can see, we're about 8:15, and we're not finished with this Torah portion. Don't worry, because we will get into the next portion. But I did want you to see some of these laws too. Again, some of them jump around and random, but look at this one. You shall not turn over to his master a slave who seeks refuge with you from his master. He shall live with you in any place he may choose among the settlements in your midst. Wherever he pleases, you must not ill-treat him. Runaway slave. According to Judaism, he's free. Once he comes into your place, gets away from his master, you're not allowed to turn him back. Folks, in case you forgot, this was not the law in the United States 150 years ago. This was the law in Judaism 3,000 years ago, which, by the way, dissuades people from having slaves. If your slave can run away and not be returned to you, not a good investment. This is a law. I mean, this was a Torah-enforced law. No Israelite woman shall be a cult prostitute, nor any Israelite man be a cult prostitute. Why is it translated as cult prostitute? Because the word kadesha and kadesh are used here. This is not the same word used for a common prostitute, a streetwalker, if you will. This is a prostitute that's engaged in cultic prostitution, which has got, again, the word kadosh as its root. The fact that that's a word in Hebrew for something that's sanctified, even if it's sanctified to another god. So not men or women are supposed to be cult prostitutes. And how do we know there's a different word? Because we have one right here. You shall not bring the fee of a whore or the pay of a dog into the house of the Lord your God in fulfillment of any vow, for both are abhorrent to the Lord your God. So here's the word zonah, which is the word for prostitution. That's not cultic prostitution. I mean, I guess you could say that any kind of prostitution could be covered by that. But here it's saying, don't come in and use the money from prostitution for your holy stuff. You could say that it's fulfillment of a vow, not necessarily anything that's holy. But look, it clearly is, again, the word to'eva is used there. To'avat Adonai, it's abhorrent. So Judaism is definitely not encouraging prostitution. What is the pay of a dog? Probably not literally a dog. Again, talking about behavior which is unbecoming. Is it talking about female prostitutes and the male version of that, which is called a kelev, a dog? It's a possibility. Some people have said that's what the kelev is a dog. We still use that word in English, by the way, for guy who sleeps around a lot. But again, that's maybe what it's talking about, is using, again, it's not the same as being a cult prostitute, but it's not encouraged. I don't want to get into the specifics of that. Again, by our standards, I mean, what do we derive from this? Shouldn't have your family involved in this kind of behavior. Now, the next part of it jumps into maybe the connection is money, where it says you shall not deduct interest from loans to your countrymen, whether in money or food or anything else. Again, you're not supposed to, again, engage in usury. You can deduct interest from loans for foreigners. Do not deduct interest from loans to your countrymen. So the Lord your God may bless you in all your undertakings in the land you're about to possess. So you are allowed to charge Gentiles interest, which of course is why Jews engaged in it, because the Torah allowed it. But Christians also followed this law, which is why they didn't charge interest on each other. They followed the Torah. So they allowed Jews to charge them interest and set up that system, which again, sometimes worked to our benefit and sometimes didn't. Because when the debt sometimes got too high, out went the Jews. Don't think that anti-Semitism always had to do with the fact they didn't like Jewish religion or the Jewish people as an ethnicity. A lot of cases, it was a socioeconomic issue, which of course begs the question, why? Because they didn't have a problem with them when they were living there, 10 years before the debt got too high. But sometimes when the debt got too high, all of a sudden the ruler got very Christian and would say, you know what, we got to get these Jews out of here. And of course, we're not going to pay them anymore. That's the theory of one of the theories of why the Inquisition was undertaken by, and not just the Inquisition, but the expulsion by Ferdinand and Isabella, because their debts to the Jewish community by that point had gotten too high. Why? Because they were engaged in a war with Muslims. And again, as they borrowed money from Jews, eventually it got so bad that they were out of money. So that is a very real possibility that the Inquisition and expulsion had as much to do with money as it did about, the religious fervor of the king and queen. But again, this is in the Torah, and that's how it gets set up. When you make a vow to the Lord, do not put off fulfilling it, okay? Because again, you'll incur guilt, whereas you incur no guilt from if you refrain from vowing. So guess what? Don't vow. Don't make promises. You must fulfill what has crossed your lips and perform what you have voluntarily vowed to the Lord, your God. Make promise with your mouth. The rabbis really, really encourage people not to do it. When we do the Kol Nidre service at Yom Kippur, we're basically saying, look, we know we've made vows. We ask for forgiveness for them because it's a big violation of the Torah. So it's better not to make those vows. But again, from that we get any kind of promise, even if it's not about money. It's just saying to God, you know what, I promise if you help me, if you get me out of this jam, God, I'll do something. Don't do it. And most importantly, don't get yourself into a position where you have to make that kind of vow. When you enter another man's vineyard, you may eat as many grapes as you want until you're full, but you must not put it in a doggy bag. Don't put it in a vessel. Look, if you're starving, eat, but don't put it in a bag and take it away. That's not okay. And again, the same thing goes for grain. You can pluck some of the ears, but don't put a sickle. Don't go nuts. Use some common sense. Now, this law might seem out of order it's definitely out of order in that we're now going back to a family law matter. And I noticed we do have Philip Wasserman on the line. I don't know if he's at home or if he's in another part of the country right now, but he is a family lawyer. So I don't want him to ring in and get mad at the at some of these laws. I know you're there.
It's Kelly on tonight. Yeah, and we're home. We just got home yesterday, but Philip, I'll go upstairs and get him.
All right. Well, only because here's the kicker right here. And here's the law. And again, you can make the argument this should go at the beginning. A man takes a wife and possesses her. She fails to please him because he finds something obnoxious about her, and he writes her a bill of divorcement. It's kind of a weird word, right? Divorcement. But this is the word, this is where we get, again, this idea of a get. If he gives her a bill of divorce, hands it to her, sends her away from his house. She leaves his household and becomes the wife of another man. And this latter man rejects her, writes her a bill of divorcement, hands it to her, and sends her away from his house, or the man who married her last dies. Then the first husband who divorced her shall not take her to wife again, since she has been defiled. Again, the word toeva. For that would be abhorrent to the Lord. You must not bring sin upon the Lord, the land of the Lord your God is giving you as a heritage. What is going on here? Well, here we had a little bit about this bill of divorce, which is that he gives her a bill of divorce. He gives her it's an actual text. It says Sefer Kritot. It's a bill of separation of being rejected, if you will. I wouldn't even say it's literally, again, cutting the person off out of your life. Now, what's going on? Why would the guy take her back? And of course, you and I know of stories of people who got divorced, they got remarried, or they started dating someone else, and then they went back and started and then remarried the woman that they were married to. I mean, I don't want to say, Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton, but there are a lot of cases that you probably know in your own life of people who've gotten back together with their spouse. We're talking about something really interesting here, which is actually taking advantage. It's gaming the system. And that is, what happens if a guy ends up basically saying that he's divorced his wife, he doesn't like her anymore, she marries somebody else, and then he takes her back? What is he actually maybe doing? He's maybe actually pimping her out. He may actually be running this system, this game, where he's able to marry her or divorce her, have her marry somebody else, and then have her come back to his house. He's essentially taking advantage of somebody else. So this is a problem. Now, again, is this law enforceable in America? Absolutely not. But in Jewish law, they really want people not to engage in this kind of, I wouldn't say really a bait and switch, but a con of having a woman marry somebody only to basically get their property. This is, it also is telling you, you better make sure that you really don't want to be with the person. There is divorce, clearly, according to the Torah, as you've just read, is allowed. There is no rule against, doesn't say you're not allowed to divorce a person. It doesn't say you're a bad person if you divorce them. It doesn't say you're a failure. It doesn't say there's no judgment at all about divorce. On the contrary, it actually gives procedure for it and makes no judgment in the procedure. But it does tell you, you better not be running a game, a con, and you better not do it without thinking about the consequences. Because there really is another issue here too, which is that when somebody gets married to someone else, even if that person then gets divorced from that next person, or if that person dies, if that spouse dies, and then you want to take the person back, it's not easy to reestablish a relationship after a person has been married or, has been involved with somebody else. And there is this recognition that it's not the way things should be. There's a saying in Judaism that when two divorced people get in bed with each other, there's 4 people in bed. And of course, it doesn't just go for divorce. It goes for widowed people as well. That there's 4 people in bed when two people have been married before are there. It's a really interesting idea. It's a powerful idea. Of course, in today's world, it's exponentially frightening to think how many people are in bed with each other at any given time. But there is something here that's very powerful in Judaism, which is we recognize that divorce isn't simply writing somebody a document and saying, okay, you can go get married to somebody else now. There are emotional and psychological consequences to divorce and to remarriage, even in a case of death. And it is not, the person is not the same once they've been married to somebody else. And it really is trying to protect society. It's trying to protect people on an individual level. And it's really based on not just some kind of pronouncement of divorced people shall not get married back again to each other. But it's really based on the fact that, did you not think about this before? Or on top of it, are you trying to take advantage of people, which is even worse? Or the very last level, don't think that the person that you were married to before is now the same person. They're not. And there's a really, really powerful lesson in that about the family dynamic and about specifically marriage and relationships. Here's a law very similar to what we saw in Shoftim. Last week's report, or 2 weeks ago, we read, when a man has taken a bride, he shall not go out to the army or be assigned to it for any purpose. He shall be exempt 1 year for the sake of his household, to give happiness to the woman he has married. Now, if you want, by the way, to think that this is sex, or again, it's a euphemism for sex, I don't know, because it doesn't say he is supposed to give her marital relations, which there's another word for it. It actually uses the word sameach. He is supposed to give her joy, the word simcha, that he is supposed to make her happy. And this is something that's really powerful. It doesn't just say he's got a marital obligation. He has to get her pregnant or whatever. It doesn't say that. It says he's supposed to make her happy. He's supposed to at least be able to give her that happiness. It's a pretty wild idea, way ahead of its time, and one that, again, tried to prevent people from terrible tragedies and disasters. Now we get into a couple of other laws. Again, I'm telling you, so many laws here. A handmill or upper millstone shall not be taken in pawn, for that would be taking someone's life in pawn. They're talking about basic stuff that they have. I mean, the equivalent today would be basically you're not allowed to take somebody's, let's say, computer, but, well, that my instinct is to say computer, but it really is like your work, your only thing you work on, which nowadays is our computer. You're not allowed to take that thing away from somebody to pawn. You can't do that. It's not fair, because then he'll never get out of hock. So it's very interesting law. In those days, again, those were the kind of things that would be basic sustenance. If a man is found to have kidnapped a fellow Israelite, enslaving him or selling him, that kidnapper shall die. Kidnapping, murder too. I mean, rape. Those are all on the same level. In the case of a skin affection, be most careful to do exactly as the Levitical priests instruct you. Take care as I've commanded you. Back in Tzara, back in the story of Mitzorah and Tazria, the Torah portions of skin effect. Go back there. Go look at that. Follow those. And remember what the Lord God did to Miriam on the journey after you left Egypt, back in Numbers, how she got affected. So remember, this is a serious thing. And we had to hold her out of camp. Even Miriam couldn't come back into camp when she had her skin disease. Now, when you make a loan of any sort to your countryman, you must not enter his house to seize his pledge. You're not allowed to go in and repossess. You're not allowed to be a repo man and come in and take his stuff. You must remain outside while the man to whom we made that loan brings the pledge out to you. You're not allowed to go in there and just start taking stuff from him. You got to wait for him to come out with it. Person still has some dignity. If he is a needy man, you shall not go to sleep in his pledge. You must return the pledge to him at sundown, that he may sleep in his cloth and bless you, and it will be to your merit before the Lord your God. If you took away his last garment as a pledge, you better give it back to him for him to sleep at, because that's taking away, again, the basic necessities of life. You must not abuse a needy and destitute laborer, whether a fellow countryman or a stranger in one of your communities. It doesn't matter if the person's Jewish. You're not allowed to take advantage of him. You must pay him the wages on the same day before the sun sets, for he is needy and urgently depends on it. Else he will cry to the Lord against you, and you will incur the guilt. What does it say right there? It tells you cannot hold on to somebody's wages. Now, Of course, most people today get paid after a week or 2 weeks. That's an understandable payday type of situation. I'm not talking about that. What they are talking about is if you've agreed on the 15th of the month to pay somebody, you don't wait till the 16th of the month. When they're counting on their money, you give it to them on the day you promised them. And that is an amazingly compassionate, and by the way, maybe it's minutia, but it's real life. And I take that law very seriously. If I enter into an agreement with somebody, I'm going to pay them at a certain time, man, I will make sure I do that, because I know what it's like to be on the other end of that, to be depending on somebody paying you and you don't get paid. It is a horrible feeling, horrible feeling. And the Torah says you do not do that. It says, parents are not to be put to death for children, nor children to be put to death for parents. A person shall be put to death only for his crime. You're not allowed to do what some cultures did, which is punish the parent. You shall not subvert the rights of the stranger or the fatherless. You shall not take a widow's garment in pawn. It's a basic necessity. Remember that you were a slave in Egypt, and that the Lord your God redeemed you from there. Therefore do I enjoin you to observe this commandment. Again, basic human dignity. You're not allowed to take away someone's dignity. When you reap the harvest in your field and overlook a sheaf in the field, do not turn back and get it. It shall go to the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow. Again, this is the law of allowing people the leket, the gleanings, the things that are left. We read about that in Leviticus. Read about it again here. Again, God will bless you if you do that. When you beat down the fruit of your olive trees, don't go over them again. They get to come over again. The stranger, the fatherless, and the widow, they get to come over and they get to pick. When you gather the grapes of your vineyard, don't pick over again. Let them come and pick. And it says right there, always remember that you were a slave. You were in that situation once before. You were a slave and you had no dignity and you had no property and you had nothing. So you have to take care of those people. Now, we're gonna finish up in a little bit, but I'm gonna go through these laws of Teitzei again. You can see jumping around again. When there is a dispute between men and they go to the law and a decision is rendered declaring one right and the other wrong, if the guilty one is flogged, the magistrate shall have him lie down and be given in his presence by count as his guilt warrants. He may be given up to 40 lashes, but no more, lest being flogged further to excess, your brother be degraded before your eyes. So there's limits to the type of punishment that you can administer. You're giving out a beating, not a good situation, of course, not something you wanted to do. When they didn't have jails, they came up with interesting punishments that sometimes were, not what you want to see, but again, you can understand why we had it, was because people needed to have a way of punishing people. Now, so 40 was the max. You shall not, actually 39 is the max, I want to point out. 40 is going too far, up to 40. You shall not muzzle an ox while it is threshing. When, again, back to animals. That one just kind of stuck out there, but let's not forget the purpose of that is to let the animal have some food too. When brothers dwell together and one of them dies and leaves no son, the wife of the deceased shall not be married to a stranger outside the family. Her husband's brother shall unite with her. He shall take her as his wife and perform the lever's duty, which is called again the law of Yibum, the Levirate marriage. And it says, the first son that she bears shall be accounted to the dead brother, that his name may not be blotted out in Israel. So it's telling us that this is a way to preserve the genealogy and the lineage of the man. But if the man does not want to marry his brother's widow shall appear before the elders at the gate and declare, my husband's brother refuses to establish a name in Israel for his brother. He will not perform the duty of the Levir, The elders of the town shall then summon him and talk to him. If he insists in saying, I do not want to marry her, his brother's widow shall go up to him in the presence of the elders, pull the sandal off his foot, spit in his face, and make this declaration. This is called the chalitza, the ritual of chalitza. She says, thus shall be done to a man who will not build up his brother's house. And he shall go in Israel by the name of the family of the unsandaled one, Beit Chalutz Hana'al, which again is the law of this ritual of chalitza, of essentially being humiliated for not providing for your sister-in-law and allowing her to have an heir, and for your brother, your own brother, to be able to say he had a descendant. Is it strange by our standards? Absolutely. When you're dealing with a tribal society where the only way for property to be passed is from within the tribe, you can understand why it was like that. Because otherwise the tribe loses, the family loses its property because, again, this woman loved the man, wanted to have a family with the man, whatever, and now if she doesn't, she's going to wind up not being able to perpetuate that family. So that's the law of the Levirate, which of course comes back up in the story of Ruth. The story of Ruth, who ends up marrying Boaz, but there was a man, we don't know his name, who was closer relation, who was supposed to marry Ruth, but who opted out. He opted out, and they went through the chalitza ceremony. So we do know that it was done. We actually have a version of that story in the Bible itself, in the book of Ruth. Here we go. If two men get into a fight with each other, and the wife of one comes up to save her husband from his antagonist and puts out her hand and seizes him by the genitals, you shall cut off her hand and show no pity. Wow, that's a pretty strict rule for getting in fights. And of course, it's talking about, of course, not just grabbing his genitals, but trying to crush his genitals. Probably goes back to the previous issue here, which is rendering the guy impotent so that he can never have kids. So yeah, it's a strange and violent and very, very scary rule. But again, it's to prevent people from being essentially becoming a eunuch, right? Castrated. You shall not have in your pouch alternate weights, larger and smaller. So don't have, you shall not have in your house alternate measures, larger or smaller. You must completely have honest weights and completely honest measures if you're to endure in the land. So again, don't cheat people with your weights and measures. Everyone who does these things, everyone who deals dishonestly is abhorrent to the Lord your God. And the Torah portion got to the end, finishes with this very, very powerful law. Zachor et asher asa lecha Amalek. Remember what the Amalekites did to you on your journey after you left Egypt. Again, we read about this in chapter 17 of Exodus. How undeterred by fear of God, he surprised you on the march when you were famished and weary, and cut down the stragglers in your rear. Therefore, when the Lord your God grants you safety from your enemies around you, in that land the Lord God is giving you as your hereditary portion, you shall blot out the memory of Amalek. Do not forget. Lo tishkach. So that's a very strange, again, law in the sense that we don't have Amalekites anymore. So we really can't enforce this law. But it is telling us, do not forget what your enemies did to you and how they attacked you and how they made you. You had just crossed the Sea of Reeds, and now these people attacked you. You just left Egypt as victors, as you've beaten the best nation in the world. And now the Amalekites come and attacked you and brought you back down to earth. And for that, and attacking the weakest in your midst, they have to be destroyed. They're bad, bad, bad people. Now, of course, we don't have Amalek anymore. The last Amalekite, according to tradition to some extent, was Ammon. Haman was a descendant of these people. But again, these were people that were hell-bent on destroying us. And so what do? We have to destroy them. Are there spiritual Amalekites today? Of course, the rabbis will tell us yes. Anybody who decides that they are going to destroy us or committed to destroying us puts it in their national or political charter, like Hamas, that they're going to destroy us. Are they like the Amalekites? Yes. The reality is that if people say that they're going to destroy you, you take them at their word. You don't have to wait for them to actually attack you, quite frankly. If somebody says that they're going to kill you, you believe them. We don't have to wait for them to prove it to us. So there are spiritual descendants of the Amalekites. There are people who have sworn to destroy the Jewish people. And if they have, you're allowed to protect yourself. You can, I mean, again, I don't want to just encourage people to go out and kill anti-Semites because that won't work. You won't be able to get away with that in court. But according to Jewish law, if somebody says they're going to destroy you, you can take them at their word and you can protect yourself. And you can say, what are you talking about? They said they were going to destroy me. I have to believe that they were going to destroy me. So in this last section today, and again, we'll see how much we get. If we don't get all the way through, we'll carry over a little bit into next week from Tavo. But I will tell you that Tavo is much different than what we just read because it really does deal with very few laws. As the previous Torah portion has many, many laws, this one has very few. And it really does deal with a couple of really important things, which is Tavo, when you enter the land that God has given you and you possess it. So when you come into the land, Tavo, you shall take from every first fruit of the soil which you harvest, which God has given you, put it in a basket, and go to the place where the Lord your God will choose to establish his name. Again, this assumes that we'll have a holy city, a holy place, Jerusalem, of course. Doesn't say it, but it's implied. You shall go to the priest in charge at that time and say to him, I acknowledge this day before the Lord your God that I've entered the land that the Lord swore to our fathers and assigns us. So you first say that. You say, I am in the place that God assigned us, in that land, and the priest takes the basket from you, and then it says you recite this. Recite this before the Lord your God. My father was a fugitive Aramean. He went down to Egypt with meager numbers and sojourned there. But there he became a great and very populous nation. The Egyptians dealt harshly with us and oppressed us. They imposed heavy labor upon us. We cried to the Lord, the God of our fathers, and the Lord heard our plea, saw our plight, our misery, and our oppression. The Lord freed us from Egypt by a mighty hand, by an outstretched arm, an awesome power, and by signs and portents. He brought us to this place and gave us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. Wherefore I now bring the first fruits of the soil with which you, O Lord, have given me. That's the recitation. And if it seemed like I knew that pretty well, it is because I do know that pretty well. And you've read it many times because you read it every year at Passover. That is our section of the Magid. When we tell the story, we read that section right there. Even though it's not necessarily talking about Passover, we read it at Passover, and we understand that Passover was a time of offering, of bringing our first fruits. In this case, it was actually bringing our barley harvest, but our harvest at Passover was our spring harvest, our first harvest, our early harvest, hopefully a great harvest because it was the first harvest. And we say this according to tradition in our Seder, because again, even though it's about harvest, it's really not. It's about being thankful for being in the land and recognizing where we came from. This is, folks, is the first Thanksgiving. This is really, truly being thankful for our journey, for the miracles that were done for us, and the fact that we recognize that our life in Egypt was difficult, but look where we are today. And I would say from this, what a beautiful thing that if we every year, well, all of us have different stories. All of us have different family stories of how we got to this country. But wouldn't it be great if every Jew at Thanksgiving, not so much again on Passover, because Passover is about our Jewish story, and really kind of our historical Jewish story, but maybe at Thanksgiving, if we told the story of how our family came to the United States, how our families came, in many cases, with absolutely nothing, from countries that also, like the Egyptians, tried to destroy us. And wouldn't it be special if every Thanksgiving the family would get together and the grandparents and the parents and the grandchildren, maybe even God willing, the great-grandchildren, told the story of how they came to this country. And again, in many ways, this country has also been a land that is a land flowing with milk and honey. It's been a land that we've been blessed to be in. And it'd be pretty powerful if we told our own story of how we came here and how grateful we are to be here. It's a pretty powerful text. And again, it's really kind of the backbone of this portion. And it says, of course, as we see in other places in the Torah, you shall enjoy together with the Levite, the stranger, in your midst, all the bounty that the Lord your God has bestowed upon you and your household. And now it says, when you have set aside in full the 10th part of your yield, your maaser, your 10th, your tithe, in the 3rd year of the tithe, and you've given it to the Levite and the stranger and the fatherless and the widow, that they may eat in your settlements, you shall declare before the Lord your God, I have cleared out the consecrated portion from the house. I have given it to the Levite, the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow, just as you've commanded me. I've neither transgressed nor neglected any of your commandments. I've not eaten of it in the morning. I have not cleared out any of it while I was unclean. I have not deposited any of it with the dead. I have obeyed the Lord my God. I have done just as you commanded me. Look down from your holy abode from heaven and bless your people Israel and the soil you've given us, a land flowing with milk and honey, as you swore to your fathers. This is another ritual. This is a ritual not like the bikurim, not of the offering, but of the maaser, of the tithe, which tells us that bringing a tithe was also important. Tithe, of course, fed these people, but it also is this recognition of the fact that I'm doing what is right, what I am commanded to do. And this ritual is saying, God, I've done what I was supposed to do. Why do we do it? Well, because we are religiously obligated to take care of those less fortunate. We have no choice. But we understand it to be literally fulfilling a mitzvah that we must make clear before God that we've done. It's not just, I took care of some charity, I made sure I wrote out a check, I gave it, but literally saying, if I had this in my possession and I was supposed, then it's on me. It's not, I was a little stingy this year. No, literally, I'm at fault if I didn't do it. And that's the difference in Judaism when it comes to the tithe, it comes to tithing. It's a serious issue. It says, the Lord your God commands you this day to observe these laws and rules. Observe them faithfully with all your heart and with all your soul. B'chol levavcha, b'chol nafshecha, just like we have, right, in the Ve'ahavta. Those words, with all your heart, with all your soul. You have affirmed this day that the Lord is your God, that you will walk in his ways, that you will observe his laws and commandments and rules, and you will obey him. And the Lord has affirmed to this day, you are, as he promised you, his treasured people, Am Segulah, that you are a treasure to God, his treasured people who observe his commandments. And again, it's not just because you're Jewish, it's because you observe the commandments. It's not because of who your ancestors were. It is because you observe them. And he will set you in fame and renown and glory high above all the nations that he has made, and that you shall be, as he promised, a holy people, an Am Kadosh. So we're Am Segulah, we're a treasured people, and we're also a holy people, just as God has promised. So we're going to read a little bit more. And again, this chapter reminds us that God doesn't just like us because of who we are, because of the way we're born, or because our ancestors, or Abraham, Sarah, and Moses, Miriam. It's because of what we do. It's because of how we act and how we behave. Moses and the elders of Israel charged the people, saying, observe all the instruction, mitzvot, that I enjoin upon you this day. As soon as you've crossed the Jordan into the land your God is giving you, you shall set up large stones, coat them with plaster, and inscribe them all the words of this teaching. Kol divrei haTorah hazot, this teaching. Which teaching? Is it the whole Torah? Is it just this part? When you cross over to the land, is it just Deuteronomy? When you cross over and to enter the land the Lord your God has given you, a land flowing with milk and honey, as the Lord, the God of your fathers, promised you. Upon crossing the Jordan, you shall set up these stones about which I charge you this day on Mount Ebal, and coat them with plaster. There too you shall build an altar to the Lord your God, the altar of stones, Do not wield an iron tool over them. You must build the altar of the Lord your God of unhewn stones. You shall offer burnt offering to the Lord your God, and you shall sacrifice their offerings of well-being and eat them, rejoicing before the Lord. And on those stones you shall inscribe every word of the teaching most distinctively. Right? Distinctly. So again, it's not that you use that altar all the time. That becomes like your entering altar, and then the altar where you turn it into a teaching. You turn it into a place where you've now created a marker of the rules. The rule, and by the way, we found these in the ancient world. We found these pillars that have rules, not just from Jews. You know, the Babylonians, the Code of Hammurabi. We find it on a pillar of stone. That we find these things, that people put them up so that people would see them. That they would see them, not just, you know, markers or statues, but actually the rules when you come in. Kind of, you know, where do we see these rules today? I mean, in all seriousness, but the only place anybody shows you any rules is when you go into a pool, jacuzzi. I'm not kidding. I mean, we've gotten to the point where, God forbid, you should tell people what the rules are. They're going to get offended or they're going to get upset. The only place is in a pool. I mean, I'm not kidding. I mean, you know, people are either embarrassed by the rules or they don't want to upset people. But man, it sure would be nice at least to see, you know, people celebrating some of our cool things, you know, some of our amazing rules that we have in this country. And again, does it have to be on a pillar? Does it have to be on something you see? Well, those kind of things do remind you. And again, it's not about establishing statues. It's not about putting up images of people. It's about putting up the rules for people so they know, and so they're held accountable, and so that they're reminded of it in case they forget, because they don't think about it all the time.
But we are fortunate that we have the 10 Commandments on our buildings in Washington, D.C., and in our departments of justice around the country. We do have at least the 10 Commandments, that at least there are some rules.
Well, there are people who've objected to it. And
I know, but they're there.
It's kind of crazy because, again, nobody's saying that we're keeping all the time. I mean, obviously, a lot of Gentiles don't keep the laws of Shabbat. They're not even obligated to. But the point is that it reminds us that there are rules, that we actually do have rules that we have to abide by. And again, I'm joking, but I'm not really joking. The only time you see these rules are posted in a pool, and that's only because people are worried about liability. You know, it's this weird kind of thing that people are afraid of reminding people in some cases because they're embarrassed. I mean, they're actually embarrassed that there are rules. I will tell you that it's nice when people, especially at a meeting or at a kind of a gathering where they say, you know what, remember, these are the rules that we're going to follow here. These are the rules of our organization. You know, we don't humiliate people. We don't, whatever the rules are. It's nice to remind people of what the rules are so that they, they treat people with some respect when they know, you know what, I know I made a mistake if I broke the rule. But again, something to think about. In our tradition, we actually post these rules. So it says, Moses and the Levitical priest spoke to all Israel, saying, silence, right? Shema, it says, it says, hasket, be quiet. Ushma Yisrael hayom, hear, O Israel, this day. Hear, O Israel, this day. And listen to all the rules that God has given you. Heed these laws, heed these commandments. And Moses charged the people, saying, after you've crossed the Jordan, and the following shall stand on Mount Gerizim when the blessing of the people is spoken. Half the tribes, Shimon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Joseph, and Benjamin, which is interesting because there it says Joseph and Benjamin. It doesn't say Manasseh and Ephraim. It doesn't give them based on their tribal portions. It gives them based on who their fathers were. So it divides them up that way. Because remember, Joseph tribe becomes Ephraim and Manasseh, and the Levites don't get a place. Actually talked about that yesterday on Tuesday. And as for the curse, the following shall stand on Ebal: Reuben, Gad, Asher, Zebulun, Dan, and Naphtali. The Levites shall then proclaim in a loud voice to all the people, cursed be anyone who makes a sculpted or molten image, abhorred by the Lord, a craftsman handiwork, and sets it up in secret. And all the people shall respond, Amen.
Amen.
Cursed will be the person who insults his father or mother, and the people shall say, Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Cursed be he who moves his fellow countryman's landmark, his boundary, and all the people shall say, Amen.
Amen.
Cursed be he who misdirects a blind person on his way, and all the people will say,
Amen.
Cursed be he who subverts the right of the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow. People will say, Amen. Cursed be he who lies with his father's wife, for he has removed his father's garment. And that's the law that we heard right at the beginning. The people shall say,
Amen.
Cursed be he who lies with any beast, and all the people will say, Amen. Cursed be he who lies with his sister, whether daughter of his father or his mother. So even if it's his half-sister, people say Amen. Cursed be he who lies with his mother-in-law, and all the people say Amen. Cursed be he who strikes down his fellow countryman in secret, and all the people say Amen. Cursed be he who accepts a bribe in the case of the murder of an innocent person, and the people will say Amen.
Amen.
Cursed be he who will not uphold the terms of this teaching and observe them, and all the people shall say Amen.
Amen.
So, I will tell you, and again, we got right to chapter 28. You can see chapter 28 will be what we call the curse that people will get. There's the blessing and the curse, which we're going to get in chapter 28. We are going to hold off on that until next week. As you can see, it's a fairly long chapter. It goes down 69 verses, the blessings and curses. The blessings, by the way, are, it's kind of repetitive in the sense that a lot of the blessings are then curses, but the blessings go on until verse 14. The curses go from verse 15 all the way down to 69. That's 54 verses of curses, or 55 verses of curses, 54 verses of curses. So that's pretty wild. That's a lot of curse. 4 times as much curse than blessing. Very detailed curses, which we're going to read next time. We're going to hold off on that because, again, it'll take us a little while to read them. They are definitely read more as a poem or as a text than laws, if you will. And then we're going to finish with that. And as you can see, Netzavim, which is the portion that we read next week, beautiful portion with some of my favorite verses. They're not laws, really. They're verses. We're going to move away now. We had the laws in Shoftim, or Re'eh and Shoftim, and Ki Teitzei and Ki Tavo, or the first part of Ki Tavo. Then we get the blessings and curses, and now we get some very interesting. We go back to the rhetoric and the kind of the preaching that Moses does to the people. And so it moves away from law. And in the last chapters, we go from blessings and curses to this kind of beautiful praising of the people. And then, guidance, if you will. Some of my favorite lines in Netzavim. But it's a much shorter portion. And then we get into Vayelech and Ha'azinu, which are the last portions of the Torah, Ha'azinu, and the last one being Bezot HaBracha, which is the poem or song that Moses gives to the people, and then the blessing he gives to the people. So the last sections, the last well, really going back to the blessing and curses that we start here in Tavo, we get away from law back to kind of Moses's goodbyes, which take several forms. They take blessings and curses. They take inspiration. They take poems and song, or poem/song, and then blessing. And so you can see that there's lots of ways to get the message across to the people. Moses is going to use all of them. He's going to use all of these devices and all these styles. And it's a perfect way, of course, to end the year, which is to remind ourselves that we have some really big obligations in front of us, lots of responsibilities, and hopefully we get inspired to do the right thing. Again, I will tell you, I'll do my best, and I'm exhausted beyond exhaustion. If anybody is looking for something to watch tonight, the last 2 days I worked on the final tribute for my father. The tribute is up on, was on JLTV tonight. It aired at 5 o'clock and it aired again at 8 o'clock, so we just missed it. But
I just watched it, Rabbi.
What?
I watched it. Well, I was a little distracted. I was watching the whole thing.
You're not supposed to admit that, Diane. You're not supposed to admit that. But
I had to share it with my Facebook friends. What you did, first of all, for the Shiva was so inspiring. I was there for 2 of them when I could get on with my computer. And that song you had played for your father, my father passed away in 1981, and it touched me.
Yeah, that's a country song by Luke Combs. And it came out, if you were listening to the whole song, the song's even better as a whole song together. There's 3 verses to it, and it's a very powerful song. But the last verse is about, again, saying goodbye to your father. And
it was amazing. How did he?
It came out about 6 months ago.
In one lifetime, how can you do all the things that he did?
I don't know. And by the way, he did most of those things up until about 10 years ago. The last 10 years, he kind of, I don't want to say he slowed down, but he definitely was not as busy, thankfully. But yeah, that song, man, that came out about 6 months ago. And I've been listening to it for 6 months. And I mean, I've been crying to it for 6 months. It's called Even Though I'm Leaving. And it's kind of helped me get through this time of saying goodbye. But dang, for anybody who's said goodbye like that, it's tough. The song, by the way, is also about the father taking care of the son in the first verse, then the son going off and fighting in the military. And so the song's actually been picked up as kind of the anthem for people who are going off into the military. And the father says goodbye to the son and says, "I'll be with you even when I can't see you." And then the last verse is the son saying goodbye to the father, and the father saying, he's still not going to go anywhere. So, yeah, I don't want to lose it right now either. But again, the last couple of days I was working on this, and I wanted to get it out. We couldn't really do a funeral for my dad, unfortunately. But it's up on Facebook. It's on my Facebook. It's on the Temple Facebook and the JLTV Facebook. And I really wanted to do a service for him. And so my dad's a good friend and was amazing to do it in the midst of everything else. Nate Lamb, the candor from Stephen S. Wise, took the time to do the memorial parts of the Jewish part, the liturgical parts of the service. And we were able to put together the service with some of the Zoom Shiva over the last few days, and some of the video, and actually some parts of the video that people haven't seen yet. And we were able to put that together, and it was kind of like the funeral, because we couldn't do a funeral right away, and I couldn't do that right away because I couldn't do what I wanted to do, which is get people to be able to eulogize. Look, we knew he was dying, but I didn't want people to do a eulogy before he died. And I just didn't like that idea. And that's the only way we could have done it. So we waited for a week, and at the end of Shiva, we created this. So it was tiring, and now I will do my best to focus on high holidays, but again, I'll do my best, and hope everybody, and I really mean that. I want to do my best because I know people are upset that they can't be in synagogue, and I feel terrible about that. And I'm going to do my best to make sure that the experience for high holidays is as good as it can be. So everybody, thank you for studying Torah with us tonight, and thank God for the mitzvah of studying Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah, for the mitzvah of studying Torah together. And again, hopefully everybody stay safe, stay strong. It's great to see you, Joyce. I'm glad you came on. We were worried at first you weren't there, so I'm glad you're there. And it's great to see your beautiful face, smiling face, and stay strong, okay?
You too.
All right,
Thank
thanks.
you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Amen, Rabbi.
Bye-bye. Bye.